Now, the city of Zaporizhzhia is reeling once more from a Russian missile attack that hit a hotel, which also served as a children's day camp. 2 missiles struck on Thursday, just an hour after the children left for the day. As Nick Payton-Walsh reports, one of the strikes was caught on video.
The first strike brought horror. A riverside hotel struck. This man with his family strolling in a Zaporizhzhia park at 7:20 Thursday evening. Terror, then another roar. The sun spots it first. As though the hotel they targeted, where a kids' camp had ended just an hour earlier, needed to be hit twice. Imagine how the children in the hotel pool felt. Dozens of guests injured, 1 dead, who did not walk away. This is how it looked before the 2 Iskander missiles hit a pool and playground in the car park. A Russian official then declared all hotels in the city to be targets, saying they're full of Ukrainian soldiers. In the hours after, sirens sounded in Kiev, as Ukraine only managed to take down 1 of 4 hypersonic Kinzhal missiles, officials saying another target was an F-16 training facility in the west. These nightly strikes, Russia's response to the pressure on the southern front, where Friday, importantly small gains were claimed. President Zelensky has urged patience, and Friday moved to steady a slow-moving ship, firing the heads of regional military recruitment after a series of corruption scandals, replacing them with wounded veterans.
Warriors who have lost their health, limbs, but maintain their dignity and don't have cynicism can be trusted to run the system.
Nick Payton-Walsh, CNN, Dnipro, Ukraine.
Claire, good morning. What more do we know about the missile attack on the Crimean bridge?
Yeah, good morning, Leila. We understand that this may have been 3 missiles in total. That's according to the pro-Russian head of Crimea, who talked about modified air defense missiles, S-200, being used. The Russian Ministry of Defense talks about 2 separate attempts to hit the bridge a couple of hours apart on Saturday afternoon. But of course, they say that they thwarted those attempts and there's no damage. I think, look, the Russian Foreign Ministry, in condemning the attack, said that the bridge was a piece of purely civilian critical infrastructure. That, I think, does not bear out in reality. That we know that this is really the only physical link between Russia and occupied Crimea, that it's a critical part of the war effort. But it's also a critical part of Russia's sort of messaging propaganda strategy, being that only physical link. It symbolizes to the Russian people, legitimizes that annexation the best part of a decade ago. It legitimizes this war. And while Ukraine hasn't said anything about these latest missile strikes, they have claimed responsibility for previous attacks on the bridge, which did cause damage. So I think, look, if this was Ukraine, it's part of sending a message, right? This Rubicon has now been crossed. The Crimean bridge they see as a legitimate target, not only to disrupt Russia's war effort, but to get across that message that they see this as an illegitimate bridge, that Crimea, they still want to take it back. And that is part of the strategy here, Leila.
And Ukraine is stepping up its crackdown on suspected corruption in military recruitment. On Friday, President Zelensky fired all heads of regional recruitment centers across the board. Mr. Zelensky accused them of using their jobs for profiteering while the country is at war. One anti-corruption activist says the move was not only about the suspects, but also about average Ukrainians. This is what she told me about an hour ago when I asked her how important it is for Mr. Zelensky to clamp down on corruption.
Corruption is perceived as a treason by many Ukrainians, especially in the wartime. So any allegations of corruption, they are coming as a dismorale for people, and there is a huge outrage for each and every news of instance of corruption. That's why for President Zelensky it's very important to fight corruption, just to get their system work properly, but also to show the people that the government is doing their job.
Now, this has been a very public announcement by the president, dismissing everyone. Does this mean that everyone was guilty of corruption? All conscription officers had problems? Or is this more meant as a message domestically and to Ukraine's Western backers? What has been the reaction so far?
So we are talking about dismissal of around 20 officers, the heads of military recruitment centers. That's why it's very important to understand that not everyone is accused of corruption, but so many of them. And because of their inefficiency of these military centers, there was a need to show people that the government is on top of the problem. We should understand that the system is inheritance of their old Soviet recruitment system, and we didn't have enough time to do the reform. The reform only started several months before the invasion, the problems were piling up, and there was a lot of bureaucracy and corruption allegations on many levels. Therefore, putting veterans and wounded soldiers is also a sign that the system is changing and it will be better in upcoming months.
As Ukraine fights the ongoing Russian aggression, its allies are working to deter any future incursion. On Friday, G7 countries said they're opening talks with Kyiv on how to build a military capable of heading off a future Russian invasion. Meanwhile, about 1,000 Ukrainian Marines are returning home after 6 months of training in Britain. They were trained by British forces on how to storm beaches and conduct other amphibious operations. And over in the US, the White House says it is open to training Ukrainian pilots on how to fly the F-16 fighter jets. European countries are still putting together plans for that training, but the White House says if Europeans reach their capacity, the US could fill that gap. British researchers say Russia has started producing its own version of Iranian military drones. Analysts believe Tehran has provided hundreds of UAVs to Moscow, which used them to devastating effect in Ukraine. But according to the Conflict Armament Research Group, Russia is now making them at home. The group came to the conclusion after analysing the remnants of 2 drones used in Ukraine last month. The researchers believe Russia will likely be able to mass produce the weapons. US officials said last month Iran was helping to build a drone factory in Russia.